Able to record now?
Yes. Okay. So here's my design preview. So the first section is the what am I going to make? So starting with my inspirations, I wanted to create something that I would be able to use long term and not just sort of like make something just because it's for this class. I really wanted something that I could keep after this class and still be able to use. And so I settled on like a chessboard because I started playing chess towards the beginning of quarantine, just as sort of like a way to pass the time with a couple of my friends. And we played a couple of other games as well. Like we played a lot of poker, a lot of chess, just sort of like online games that we could do together to sort of pass the time that were easy. And so a couple of my friends have also done some really cool projects using LEDs. For example, one of my friends, Nick, has an LED system set up in his living room that changes color depending on the sound level in the room. So if the sound in the room is a lot higher, like for example, whenever we were having parties prior to COVID, then the lights would be a lot more bright and a lot more flashing. Whereas if it was quieter in the room, the lights would be a lot more dim. And so I thought it'd be really cool to incorporate a sort of like time changing component using LEDs into the board. And that's where I sort of got the inspiration for that. So my vision for the board, the aesthetic that I'm going for is sort of combining sort of a rustic and technological aesthetic. The rustic aesthetic will be achieved by having the entire framework of the board being assembled out of wood, whereas we'll get that technological aesthetic by incorporating some acrylic components as well as having those LEDs underneath. And so my vision is just to be able to have the board and then like compartments for all the pieces be all in one assembly. So rather than having to like go out and get like a bunch of different pieces, everything you need is just right there in one single unit. And so my main goal for this is just to have something sturdy enough that's able to last me a long time and have lots of uses. So here are some of my sketches and plans. The photos are a little bit small. I have them enlarged on the next slide. So that top photo though shows sort of like an inside view of where the board, and it's going to show where all the components are as well as where all the LEDs are going to be stored in the center there. I also have a CAD rendered model of it later on in the slide, so it'll be able to explain a little bit better. And then that bottom photo shows sort of what the top of the board is going to look like with the board itself and then the tops of the compartments and how I'm going to try and incorporate buttons to control the LEDs. So here's them sort of enlarged a little bit more so you can sort of see. The photo on the right is going to be like the inside. So where I have sort of it colored in, that's where it's going to be flashed with the top, and then it's going to have sort of like sections inside. And here's the CAD photo of it as well. I feel like it shows it a little bit better how I'm planning on incorporating like components. So on top of each of those sections will be like an acrylic sheet to sort of act as like a cover for each of the compartments. And so far, the only progress I've made in assembling has been to acquire the materials, which I have right there. It's just a couple pieces of plywood and a couple pieces of wood that I'm going to be using for all the assembling. Next part is how am I going to make it? So this is sort of my timeline for this. Since the final project is due by the 24th, I just sort of have it broken down into the weeks that we're going to be working on this. So this week, my plan is to either meet with McGuckins or the ITLL to cut down all the wood that I have to the correct sizes that I'm going to need, as well as acquire all the different types of acrylic that I'm going to be using. I'm planning on incorporating like a couple different colors into it, so I just have to go out and find where I'm going to get that. I think I'm going to end up going to, I think it's called like Colorado Plastic Company or something like that up in Longmont or Louisville or somewhere, but anywhere around here hasn't really had multiple colors of acrylic, unfortunately. And so the other option I have is just ordering it online, like through Amazon or something, which is also probably what I'm going to end up doing with when I order the chess and checkers pieces as well. And since I have four compartments, I figured why not just have one compartment for chess and then one for checkers as well. So, because same board, might as well. So my plan next week is to use some software to plan out the designs that I'm going to be putting on all the acrylic covers, as well as cutting out all the acrylic squares. And then I really want to be able to stain and assemble the wood frame by next week, if I have it all cut out this week, so that I can finally start like measuring stuff out and working around like an actual frame. And then I also want to purchase the color changing LEDs by next week as well. The week after that, I really want to have all the acrylic cemented together, and so I can have like a finished board, and so I can sort of start working with the LEDs as well and how to figure out how to best place them underneath, as well as how to code them. And then that final week, I just really want to work on implementing the LEDs, because I think that's going to be a lot of coding and probably a lot of work as well. And then so I just have that week set aside entirely for that, as well as doing the final report. Lastly, the fabrication process. So fabrication is really going to be broken down into the wood and acrylic components. So right now for the wood, I have several 1x2x8 pieces of wood that I just need to chop down to 2 sets of length of 31, 29, 22, and 20 inches, all using a saw. That's going to form the outside of the frame, as well as the inside sort of section where there's going to, that's going to house the LEDs and the board itself. And then I've got a 2x4 that I'm going to chop down into some 3.5 squares. Those are going to go in each of the corners to sort of separate out the 4 compartments that I have on each side. And then I have some 1/4-inch plywood that I'm going to be using. And then I need to chop down to a height of 1.75 inches and then a bunch of different lengths that I have. And those are all what's going to be going on the inside of the compartments to sort of act as the rest for the acrylic covers, so that they can rest on top of that. And then I have a single piece of 1/2-inch plywood, and that's going to be chopped down to 31 by 31 inches. And that's just going to serve as the base for the entire assembly itself. For the acrylic, I was thinking of just using like a black 1/4-inch acrylic that's going to be cut down to 20/20. So that's going to be the board in the center, and then I'm going to have an 18 by 18 inch hole cut out of the center, and that's where all of the different colored squares are going to be going for the actual board. And I was going to use white and gray frosted acrylic, and so the LEDs underneath could actually shine through rather than just sort of being pretty dim like you would get with just regular black acrylic. I wanted to go with either sort of a see-through or a frosted acrylic. My plan is to use just acrylic cement to combine all the pieces. It's something that I've worked a lot with before, both in college and high school, so I know it'll hold really well. And then I was also probably just going to keep with that black acrylic theme and just use that for the covers as well. And each of those is going to be 3.5 inches by 22 inches. And then all of my cuts and engraving will probably be done with the laser cutter. And that is everything.